Tēnā koe matua. It is lovely to have you here today. Um,
No, Te Ao Gareth. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful, wonderful. I would like to introduce you properly to the masses. And in the first place, I've had the pleasure to get to know Paul more recently, and I'm obviously a big fan of the work that you do, particularly in human rights. And today we have Paul Hunt, who is our Chief Human Rights Commissioner for New Zealand, which is the Human Rights Commission in New Zealand. Paul Hunt was appointed New Zealand's Chief Human Rights Commissioner in 2019. He is a national of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the UK. Paul studied law at Cambridge University and Waikato University. He has lived and undertaken human rights work in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Aotearoa. For more than a decade, Paul served as an independent human rights expert for the United Nations, reporting to the UN General Assembly and UN Human Rights Council. He wrote and presented some 30 UN reports, including on the World Trade Organization, World Bank, IMF, Guantanamo Bay, the Israel-Lebanon conflict in 2006, and on numerous countries. Paul's focus was the human rights to healthcare and health protection. Between 2011 and 2013, he was Senior Human Rights Advisor to WHO, Assistant Director General Dr. Flavio Bustreo. He has published extensively on human rights and has been awarded 2 honorary doctorates in recognition of his scholarship. In 2021, he was awarded the Anne Dysart Distinguished Service Award by the Civil Society Organisation Multicultural New Zealand. Welcome, Matua. I think your intro does not explain everything that you've done in the first place. And so I wanted to mihi to you and say to you that I'm aware of many other things that you've done. And we're very, very grateful to have you join us today in this discussion, or kōrero. So with that, a big mihi atu matua. Thank you so much for making time.
My pleasure, my privilege, Gareth.
Wonderful. So with this, we've had some discussions about human rights. We've talked about the contemporary issues which exist in human rights today. But what I wanted to do is, I guess in the first place, is just go a little bit more about who you are and ask you, why are you interested in working in such a difficult area? I mean, human rights is such an important thing to all of us, but at the same time, it comes with so many challenges in terms of the ability to deal with conflict and the nuances and the complexities of human rights itself. So, Matua, if you've got a minute, tell me what brings you here and why you're keen to continue working human rights.
Well, it's a really good question, Gareth. Obviously, I've given it thought. And as a young man, it kind of settled on me that I should work broadly in this field. I didn't know all its ins and outs, not at all. It was quite an instinctive thing. I remember opening a book once. I've still got the book on my bookshelf, a little paperback, and I opened it up, and I remember seeing there was a reference to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the third bullet was the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. And I got no idea what they were, but they kind of grabbed me. I thought, blimey, that's interesting. What's all that about? And I was casting around for a role. I decided to be a lawyer because I didn't know, frankly, what I wanted to do. I thought that would be a good degree to have. And then gradually I began to learn about human rights, and I began to think, well, I was working in private practice as a lawyer in London for a while. I really enjoyed it, but I knew I didn't want to do it for 30, 40 years. I was looking for something else. And gradually the human rights discipline, if you like, became clear to me, and I decided to go for that. I have to say that one big influence was that I applied to the Quakers, the British Quakers, to Quaker Peace and Service, it was called. I'm not a Quaker. I wasn't a Quaker then. I'm not a Quaker now, but I applied to do some work with them. And I worked with them for some 2 or so years. And they influenced me. I couldn't quite take the plunge to join the Society of Friends, as it's called, the Quakers, but they shaped me. Their injunction to talk to people, the way they put it is, there's that of God in everybody. They talk about sitting with people and listening to people, and reaching out in peace and respect. So that sort of shaped me by accident. It was I began to work with them, paid by them, and some of their values obviously rubbed off onto me.
Wonderful. I've got to say that this is a beautiful segue into what I'm about to ask you. And I think it's a really key thing in that in human rights, we've got people on the spectrum in terms of where their ideologies are, where their beliefs are, their views. And we quite often talk about this concept of the ability to engage with others that we disagree with. And when I say disagree with, sometimes dramatically disagree with. And that could be discussions with the far right. It could be discussions with gangs or organizations which are typically against civil society. And I guess the question I've got for you right now, and it becomes more of a, what is your philosophy in terms of having those potentially brave discussions? I'm of the view, and I follow the view that as I've studied the Northern Ireland conflict, a very complex situation, being part Irish and having studied sort of my tupuna or my whakapapa or what happened to my people in that particular area, is that one of the things that stood out is that one of the key tenets to sort of solving the conflict is when peoples that technically hated each other began to communicate and talk to each other. And yet today that is sometimes not supported because we're not going to negotiate or we're not going to talk to people which are so far from us. So my question to you, Matua, is that what is your philosophy on that, and how would you frame that and talk about it? Kia ora.
Well, my instinct has always been to talk to people, and actually I don't think I've ever reported this before. As a young man, I was in the United Nations in when was it? It was the 1980s, and I was in New York, and it was the time when the fascist regime in Argentina had invaded, if that's the right word, the Malvinas, or the Falkland Islands, and I went to looking back, it was a bit crazy. I went to the Argentinian office, the office of Argentina in New York, and I knocked on their door and I said, "Look, can I sit with you? Can I talk with you?" And they said no, but they made an appointment. They said, "You can come back and we'll have a talk." And I came back and I had a talk with this diplomat who was very bemused. But my instinct was just to talk to these people. I didn't agree with their politics, right? And but I just thought it was important to listen and talk. People were fighting. The British at that point were fighting the Argentinians, but I thought it was important to talk. So that's my sort of instinct. Now, it's not just instinct that I depend upon as Chief Human Rights Commissioner. I have to depend upon the Human Rights Act, which sets out my functions. And Section 5 of the Human Rights Act talks about the imperative of building harmonious relations. So how I read that and how I take that is that, of course, certain ground rules have to be agreed, but you talk to people, you meet with people, and that's why it was. When I received an invitation from the Waikato Magromog chapter, they reached out to me. They said we should talk. And after a long process of sort of discussion of agreeing certain ground rules, I went and talked with them, with others. That was my instinct, to talk with them and to talk about rights and responsibilities and relationships. That's what I did. And then when it came, as some people will remember, when it came to the parliamentary grounds protests back in January last year, again, they reached out to me. They said, look, we want to talk. Some of the leaders, not all of them, some of the leaders reached out to me and said, look, we've got human rights issues here. There's human rights questions. We want to talk with you about it. Again, we did various checks. We did our homework properly. And my instinct was to go and talk with them. And on both those occasions, with the mongrel mob and also with those who I spoke with around outside Parliament, I wasn't trespassing. I wasn't on the parliamentary grounds. We went elsewhere and met elsewhere. What I said to them was, no misogyny, no racism, no anti-Semitism, no violence, no homophobia. This is not acceptable. So I said all that to them, and then at the same time I listened to them, and they had some interesting things to say. So my instinct is to, for the most part, to listen and learn and talk. But when it comes to being Chief Human Rights Commissioner, I have to be guided by the Act. But when I look at the Human Rights Act, there in Section 5, it says that I should be encouraging harmonious relationships. And I think that means you have to talk.
Matua, why do you think you were criticized for it? Because I'm aware of it, and some of it was a little bit public about these incursions into, say, the mongrel mob or going to the protests. Why, in your mind, why did the criticism attach itself to those events?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I know that some people objected because they said, well, the protesters were breaking the law. They were trespassing. And by meeting with them, not on the parliamentary grounds, I didn't trespass, but by meeting with them, they said you were sort of condoning their law breaking. And I get that. However, I don't take the view that necessarily means you don't talk to somebody. And what it means is that you speak bravely with them, you speak truth to power, and you say, look, you shouldn't be breaking the law if that's the case. Certainly you shouldn't be violent, and neither should you be advocating violence. But for me, it's not an absolute. If someone's breaking the law, that doesn't necessarily mean I won't talk to them. Whereas other people who I respect greatly, they take the view, no, if they're breaking the law, let them stop breaking the law, then talk to them. And so we just have a different view about that. So I understand why what I did upset some people. I still think it was the right thing to do. In some of those meetings, I was able to talk about, there are human rights that have to be taken into account by the protesters. You've got responsibilities. I talked about responsibilities. They've got not just rights to demonstrate, but they'd also got responsibilities to communities. So it was an opportunity to talk about those things, and I thought it was the right thing to do. But good people in good faith can have a different view. I understand that.
Well, and I think this is a key tenet of where we could potentially go in this discussion today, is that quite often, actually often people are good inherently, and they've got their points of view, their different worldviews. And this is probably where I want to introduce a bit of Te Ao Māori, sort of a Māori perspective to human rights, is that Māori will have our perspectives, and I'm a New Zealand Māori. I'm very proud to be European, very proud to be Māori at the same time. I consider myself to be part of a river that where can you separate the water of your Europeanness or your Māoriness, is that you're water and you're going down this river, so you are connected. But I still have, I guess, some worldviews which strongly resonate with me in terms of a Te Ao Māori perspective about being connected to the whenua or to the land, understanding that I'm part of a collective system, and understanding that there's a lot more perhaps in front of me in the horizon than what's behind the horizon. So I've got this Te Ao Māori perspective, which helps to connect me to things which I think are really important. So in a long-winded way, is that if we think about human rights in a Te Ao Māori perspective, is that, how do they intersect? And this is my question for you, Matua, is that how does the tenets of the human rights code, the legislation intersect with a Te Ao Māori perspective, where a worldview indicates that we're connected to far more than what we see perhaps in the horizon. How would you sort of frame that?
Yeah, this is a really big issue, really good question. Look, when I stand back and look at human rights protections and understandings of human rights in Aotearoa, I have to say I think that our current dominant, prevailing understanding of human rights reflects a very truncated view of humanity. It's the prevailing view of human rights, the prevailing understanding of human rights today in Aotearoa is very individualistic. It's about me, it's not about us. The prevailing view of human rights today in Aotearoa, it has a very limited scope. It's focusing on a handful of really important human rights. I'm not dissing them. They're really important human rights, but they're only one limited part of the spectrum. And another limitation of contemporary understandings of human rights in Aotearoa is that they tend to be very judicial. People think these are, you go to court if you wish to have your human rights defended. I could go on, but there are these features of the prevalent understanding of human rights in Aotearoa, which I think doesn't do justice to humanity. It doesn't. It reflects a very, as I said, truncated view of humanity. So, frankly, when I then do my best to listen to my tangata whenua colleagues and friends, and I try to understand, grossly, inadequately, but I try to understand, Te Ao Māori, and then it seems to me that a whole new vista of things open up, which chime with a holistic vision of human rights. So I think that we need to refresh and revisit and reclaim the dominant prevailing understanding of human rights. We need to ensure that they're not just about me, they're about us, that they have a collective component. They're not just about going to court, they're about handing a tool to communities. They're not just about civil and political rights, they're about civil and political rights, workers' rights, social rights, cultural rights, the indigenous people's rights, the right to a safe and healthy environment. The vision that is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is this broad vision, not this narrow vision that we have prevailing in Aotearoa. So when I listen to my tangata whenua friends and colleagues, when I learn about Te Ao Māori, it seems to me that Te Ao Māori is fortifying this broader vision of human rights, which was there back in 1948 after the Second World War, when the Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. It was there then, and we've lost sight of it. And I think that Te Ao Māori can help us refresh, reclaim, revive human rights in Aotearoa in multiple ways. I haven't referred to all of them. I've referred to just some of them. So for me, non-Māori have nothing to fear. We've got really nothing to fear. We've got much to gain from Te Tiriti and from Te Ao Māori. And one of the things we will gain is a refreshed conception of human and indigenous rights.
Kia ora mātua. Obviously your words are like music to me, and part of that is because I agree with you. But there was something that our good friend and colleague talked about a while back, Ming Foon, who you work with, and just want to mihi out to mātua Ming Foon. And we talked about this concept that the human rights quite often has been very transactional, and it's less relational, which is for me, listening to your kōrero right now, is that the Te Ao Māori aspect focuses on that relational capability, that relational aspect, but our current set parameters under the Human Rights Commission and the way that we look at the judiciary, the way that we look at things, tends to be very transactional. And I think this is the important thing, for me when I listen to what you're saying, and obviously your good colleagues like Ming Foon and so on, is that it makes me reflect on the importance of elevating this relational concept, and that sort of connects me to another question I wanted to sort of direct towards you, is that we know that if we can bring in this collective, holistic, relational aspect, and embed it more and more into human rights, we know that it feels good, it sounds right, it does actually make sense. But the challenge that we actually do have is that I still believe that we're in a colonized state, as a country. Aotearoa technically is still impacted by the remnants of colonization. Our whole infrastructure is set up in such a way. So my question becomes this: is that how does the Te Ao Māori concept and contemporary human rights assist decolonization? And it's a big question. And if you can answer this, you're probably going to win the lotto.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can't answer it adequately, but I am wrestling with this very much at the moment, and I haven't got there yet, and maybe I never will. But it's super important, and I was recommended to read an article recently, and I've recently looked at it. It's an article called "Decolonization is not a metaphor." Decolonization is not a metaphor, and it's a really seminal article. It's a brilliant article, and what I can't, I'll try and get elements of what the authors are saying, but I won't be able to catch it all, of course. But what they're saying is, be careful how to use. We need to decolonize education. We need to decolonize the welfare system. We need to decolonize whatever. Be careful with that, because they're saying decolonization is more than that. Decolonization is more than sort of social justice. Decolonization is sort of about repatriation of land and life to indigenous peoples. So it might all be good stuff about decolonizing this and decolonizing that, but often that's really just a different word for social justice. And these authors are saying decolonization is more than social justice. It's actually reframing, repatriating land and life and power, and addressing privilege. So these are things that I'm struggling with at the moment. And I think that my position at the moment is, and it might change by next weekend, but my position at the moment is that human and indigenous rights have a role in decolonization. They are not decolonized themselves. They probably alone can't reach a decolonized world, but I think that human and indigenous people's rights can contribute to decolonization. I think they are a decolonizing tool. Can they do the job alone? I suspect not. But I think that they can make a big contribution towards decolonization, which we continue to face in Aotearoa and in Australia and many other settler colonies.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm sort of grabbing onto that for a second, because I know in my own mahi, when I teach Te Tiriti workshops or the Treaty of Waitangi workshops, and have across the motu for many years, or I talk about key principles, Māori values attached to, say, manaki or manakitanga, or things such as tiaki, to actually guard, protect, or kaitiaki, and even the concept of mana, protecting someone's mana, their respect, their integrity, their self-esteem, is that there are these key values that were taught to me from my Māori perspective, which are also tend to be a little bit European as you dig further back and you realize that some of our European peoples had gone through their own colonization. As an example, Ireland, which is a good example.
Absolutely.
And there was a ferocious colonization. And And so we think about Scotland, parts of Wales or Wales, sorry, and so we've
Yeah.
got these commonalities where we've gone through these same sort of types of trauma, but there are value systems that step out. The value systems such as manaki, respect and hospitality, mana, respecting each other and their integrity of the other person, or kaitiaki, to guard. And so I guess what resonates with what you've just said is that there are actual principles and value systems which we can attach to this concept of using human rights or bringing human rights and indigenous sort of views together. But then it goes on to a question I want to put to you right now is that this is easily said, and it's music to the ears. But how do we formalize that type of framework? Are we looking at Te Tiriti as a guideline? Are we looking at some sort of framework which is going to help us to introduce these value systems, which are more relationally orientated into human rights? And my question for you, Matua, is that what are some of the implementation guides or steps to making this happen, if there are any?
Yeah. Well, some listeners will be pleased, others will be dismayed, but I do take some inspiration from Matike Mai, the report written a few years ago by the late Professor Moana Jackson and Professor Margaret Mutu and many others. And I think that it's helpful to think in terms of the Kawanatanga space under Article 1 and the Article 2 Kawanatanga space. And then there's got to be a relational space where we cohabit, where we confer, where we discuss, where we agree, where we disagree. So that for me is an important framework. I'm not saying it's definitive, not at all. It's still very much in the process of development, but that to me is helpful. And now there's something else that I find helpful, but I'm reading at the moment something which says no, it's not the way to go. But nonetheless, I haven't quite let go of it yet. But it's this idea for which I was very criticized to advocating just a few weeks ago. The idea of as we prepare for 2040, the anniversary of Te Tiriti, how about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and a place where stories can be told, can be acknowledged, can be recognized, but then moving on to reconciliation and to justice. And it might be Matike Mai has a role in that process. So I think there's something important in that process, a process of reconciliation, truth-telling, justice, and peace. So and there's a lot of work now, a lot of literature, a lot of practice on truth, justice, and reconciliation commissions, and I think we should look at them. And we can't just take something from the shelf and use it in Aotearoa. We can't do that, but we can learn some lessons from elsewhere and see if they might help. So that's another way I think we have of stepping forward. Another way of stepping forward, is we're experimenting, we're trying. We don't quite know how to do this, but we just give it a go. So if I can give you one little example, right? One little example. In the Human Rights Commission, we're privileged and honored to have recently appointed Professor Dr. Claire Charters to work with us. And she will speak for herself. But part of her responsibilities is to help us at the sort of operational level, how to teach around Te Tiriti, how to think through co-governance, things of that sort. But also she's got a governance role as well. Because I'm embarrassed to say that we do not have tangata whenua representation on our board. It's just incredible. Since 2017, Gareth, there's been no tangata whenua on our board. The government selects the board. I do not. I chair it, but I do not have control over composition. So So what we've done is we've entered into an arrangement with the National Iwi Chairs Forum, Clare Charters, and the Human Rights Commission. So we said to the National Iwi Chairs Forum, we need someone to help us with operational level and governance level tangata whenua. And you select them. We said to the National Iwi Chairs Forum, you select who you think is appropriate. Okay, we want to do better in relation to Article 2, Tino Rangatiratanga. So you select somebody, and we'll appoint them. You select, we appoint, and we'll pay for them. So they selected, the National Iwi Chairs Forum selected Professor Charters, and we appointed her, and she's now working closely with us, both at the governance level. She's not formally a member of the board. That's not permissible under the statute, but she's working with us at the governance level as a partner at the governance level, and she's also helping us at the operational level. Now, I think this is kind of interesting model. It's an interesting pilot. We have a sort of Tino Rangatiratanga organization, National Iwi Chairs Forum, selecting somebody, and then a Kawanatanga organization, which the Human Rights Commission is. I mean, we can't get away from that. That's just how it is. We then appoint this person, and that person is then has various jobs, one of which is to help us be more respectful of Article 2 of Te Tiriti. So look, it's a little pilot, it's a little model. It might not survive, but my point is that we and many others are trying to find ways, appropriate, lawful ways, which are lawful and also respectful of Te Tiriti and Tino Rangatiratanga. That's what we're trying to do. So it's pilots, trials, experimentation. We'll go two steps forward here. We might fall back one step. Doesn't matter. Let's keep marching on. It's a very dynamic process. It's an exciting process. And I feel fervently that, non-Maori will benefit from this, not just tangata whenua. Because you'll excuse me, Gareth, this is presumptuous of me, but, in Te Tiriti and in Te Ao Māori, there is an understanding of intergenerationality. There's an understanding of relationality. There's an understanding of collective. There's an understanding of belonging and community. Now, all of those things non-Maori need. So we need to learn from that, and we'll benefit from that. So that's the way forward as I see it. Human rights and the values they embody, Indigenous peoples' rights as well, and informed by Te Ao Māori, which takes us into the realm of decency and fairness and equity and community and belonging and papatuanuku and intergenerationality. That's the way to go. Precisely how it's going to work out, we don't know. But with good faith and with determination and by talking to each other, we'll get there.
Well, just a big mahia to the National Iwi Chairs in the first place. And I think that's an exciting thing that you've just talked about. And this concept of truth and reconciliation, commissions. I mean, I was able to witness and see a little bit of what they did in South Africa years ago. And I was quite moved by what I saw and what I experienced. It was just dramatic in terms of helping them to heal. But just something here that I picked up on is that we do have to change though. I was at a conference last week and I presented in a panel, and it was a national conference per se for security, and I talked about the changing. In fact, I called it shading places based off an old film called Trading Places. You remember Richard Pryor, for American, he's moved into a white privileged position, and the film looks at the dynamics of how we traded places from, someone that had been discriminated against to someone that was very, very much privileged. And so I talked about this concept last week about in 2043, the New Zealand's population changes quite dramatically. This is only 20 years. 26% of the population, according to our population stats and trends, would indicate that it's going to be an Asian population. 24% will be Māori, 11% will be Pacifica. So what's happened is that if we go back to, say, 1896, where there are 700,000 Pākehā, to about 39,000 Māori, we're looking at a 94% population domination just at around 1900 to purely sort of Pākehā, European. Now what we find is in, say, 2043, we're looking at, say, a population drop in terms of the influence of Pākehā to about 64%, to this just under, just over 50% of what we'll call the shading or the brown population. And we know that with Asian society, Pacifica and Māori, they're very collective. They're very culturally based. So it's very different from the individualistic sort of Pākehā sort of cultures which are out there. So that trend is happening. And no matter what we say, it's going to happen. And then if you go to 2075, the trend just actually gets quite dramatic in terms of what happens to New Zealand. But there's a clear sort of trading places, if I can put it that way. And with that trade of potential light or skin hue comes collectivism and the way that we think in communities and societies. So I think what you're saying is really important, because before we get to that point, we've got to think about how do we deal with the trauma of the past. And so I love this concept of truth and reconciliation. And I'm just going to ask you a pointed question. When will this start? When do you intend to get this going? Because I think it's a brilliant idea. Do you have an idea in terms of how it could be rolled out? Do we need support from both society, government? How do we do it?
Yeah. I first, when returning to Aotearoa back in 2019 to take up this the post of Chief Human Rights Commissioner, I wrote an article about which wasn't published. I wrote an article about Truth and Justice Reconciliation Commissions, and I was sort of testing the idea of, is there a place for them in Aotearoa? And I thought there was, but my piece wasn't accepted, and I just let it go. And then we've been having this work in the Human Rights Commission, working with some wonderful tangata Te Tiriti and tangata whenua around the future of Aotearoa, and in particular in relation to race. And there have been two, my colleagues, I can take no credit for them. It's been led by Commissioner Meng Thun and by eminent tangata whenua, partners outside the Human Rights Commission, and that we've produced two documents, and one of them is called Maranga Mai, and this is written by eminent tangata whenua, and we are proud. The Human Rights Commission is proud to publish it. But in Maranga Mai, in this document, which is about white supremacy, racism in Aotearoa, in that document, we raise the idea of a truth, justice, and reconciliation. That there is raised this idea of a truth, justice, reconciliation commission. So it's now sort of formally there. It engendered some discussion a few months ago when Maranga Mai was published. I was thrilled that the Tangata Whenua caucus embraced this idea. When it will happen, I don't know, but it's now there on the table, and it's with the recommendation has been provided by Tangata Whenua to government. So we shall see. It needs more thought, and what I have in mind is that prior to 2040, we should have had a reconciliation commission, which will then feed into possibly a constitutional transformation in 2040.
Well, very exciting. And, to hear this for the first time is very encouraging, because things haven't been fully repaired. Things are still not right. And, we can see it in the way that things occur today. As you're aware, I do a bit of work with Inclusive Aotearoa Collective Tahono with my esteemed colleague Anjum Rahman, big mihi out to you. and she's come up with this fantastic sort of kaupapa, where we will go onto the marae and we will help facilitate a type of truth and reconciliation where local hapus and local iwi will talk about their pūrākau, who they are, where they came from, and we'll be inviting Pacifica communities and ethnic communities to come to this hui to also share their experiences and stories. And part of that is because many migrants, when they first come to New Zealand or Aotearoa, they don't go to a marae. They've never experienced a noho marae. In fact, quite often they've been presented very negative connotations and information about who Māori are. And therefore, right from the get-go, there's an element of mistrust and disengagement. And so this sort of kaupapa that we're doing right now, and we're really excited about it, we'll take right across the motu, is to bring these local communities together with their local iwi and hapu groups, so that local Māori can say, well, this was our whenua, this is what happened to us, this is our truth. And part of that reconciliation process is to then allow these ethnic communities in Pacifica to also talk about what their truths are, what they experienced to get here, what they're going through right now. And so the whole hope is to build, a better social justice, social cohesive society. And that's a shameless plug for the work that we're doing, Paul, so I do apologize. But it leans and supports into what you're just saying about this potential national truth and reconciliation sort of kaupapa, which is really important. So I want to segue into one or two of the last questions I want to present to you right now, because I think it's really important that we still address this concept of how do we look at contemporary understandings of human rights? How do we sort of apply te tiriti principles to help us achieve some type of real momentum going forward? Because I think it's great to have clear appointed into a te kawana sort of concept and also operational. But is it enough? That's the first question I've got. The second one is that, do we tokenize te tiriti? Quite often as a treaty presenter and facilitator, I will work through these checklists where organizations say that, yes, karakia, waiata, haere Māori, we're treaty orientated. Oh, and let's name all of our rooms in Māori. And from now on, when we count to 10, we're going to count from 1 to 10. And I sit back quite often saying, oh, we're missing so much about what the treaty was supposed to be, which was about equity, which is about sort of representation, sovereignty. So my question to you is, and it's a question I ask many organizations, is how do you effectively embed a true concept of treaty into the HRC?
Well, I'm sorry if it sounds a bit cliched. It's a journey, right? It's a journey. And there are some wonderful colleagues in the Human Rights Commission who have been on this journey for a long time. And they continue to be leaders for us. And now we have new leaders coming in and new ideas. We've made a look. What I'm saying, Gareth, is not adequate, right? But it's just honestly replying to your question. So I'm really thrilled that we have the benefit of Professor Dr. Claire Charters helping us with the ops side and also with the governance side. But in addition, we're doing something else. The board has decided to appoint a shared leadership in the Human Rights Commission at the chief executive level. Again, the statute requires there to be one chief executive, and there we are. We have to conform to statute. But in addition, there'll be another leader with comparable status, whose will be aligned with Article 2. So the first leader, as it were, is chief executive with a particular orientation to Koanatanga, Article 1. But she is appointed. She will be engaging with shared leadership with someone of comparable status and stature who will be particularly aligned to Article 2 of Te Tiriti, and their responsibility will be to ensure that the organization, so far as we can with existing structures, is respectful of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So the two of them will have collective responsibility for the running of the organization. They will support each other, but one has an orientation towards Article 1 and the other has an orientation towards Article 2. So it's kind of techie and legal and so forth, but for us, it's important. It's an important message that we're taking this stuff seriously, not just with Claire's appointment, that's at the level of commissioners, but also at the leadership level, the level 1 within the organization. Shared, equitable leadership between two people, one aligned with Article 1, one particularly aligned with Article 2, but collective responsibility. So that's what we're trying to do. And but I guess I'd like to end these remarks with this point. What we're also doing is very similar to, I think it chimes with the wonderful work you, Gareth, and Anjem and your colleagues are doing. Because what we are also doing is reaching out to Hapu and Iwi and Tangata Tiriti and talking about Te Tiriti and talking about multiculturalism grounded in Te Tiriti. We're talking about these different conceptions of human rights and people's rights. So it's not just the sort of big structural stuff, shared equitable leadership. It's also very much flax roots work, trying to deepen understanding of human rights, indigenous rights, Te Tiriti and Te Tiriti. So we try and do the both of them, these two different levels with a range of different projects, Gareth. Have we got it? No, we haven't. We're not there yet. But you know, we're just doing our best to make progress on this journey.
Kia ora mātua, and a big mihi out to you and your colleagues, because we see the work that you're doing. We see the mahi out there, and obviously, you know, as many people which can jump on the waka and do what we can do is the best thing for all of us. But I wanted to mihi to you because we've seen the success that you've had, but we can all work together, I guess. I guess my last question for you right now is to say this to you, is that I wanted to acknowledge you in the first place, is that you know, having had some kai with you and shared soup and experiencing the Māori, I wanted to sort of just acknowledge that, you know, we miss so much through technology and doing this type of sort of interview via Zoom. But you know, for those who are listening, is that Mātua Paul is someone that I highly respect, not because of what he says, but because of how he feels. And it's a bit of a Te Ao Māori thing. You know, spending time with Meng is the same, is that it's less about what you say, it's about how you feel with people. And because at the end of the day, human rights has to have that human element. Is how do we respect people? How do we uplift them? How do we sort of ensure that we motivate them and respect their mana? And so my last question for you right now, Mātua, is that you have this richness of understanding who people are. I believe you do. Many other people do. And you've got this real champion sort of kaupapa about protecting human rights for the future. So my question is future-based, is where do you see the ultimate human rights position for Aotearoa going forward? What is your utopia for human rights? Let's just pick a date, 2040, the anniversary of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. In 2040, what do you see in terms of Aotearoa making the biggest strides in human rights and being a Templar, a model for society right across the world? What's your utopia? What's your vision?
Well, Gareth, what I'd say is I won't try and sort of describe the utopia, but I want to describe something. That what I think we should be aiming for is to have this holistic vision of human rights, which I indicated earlier, with understandings of belonging and community and relationships and responsibility and intergenerationality and respect for Mother Earth. What I want is that and all the values embodied by them to be at the center of everything. Those values and those understandings, including of Te Tiriti, they should be at the center of everything. And the vital thing is the values that they embody. And that's what I look for. I look to try and ensure that those values are at the center of everything. The center of policy making, the center of community work, the center of laws. And if we can get them right, if we can get them center of everything, then I think our society will be a society which is respectful and caring, which has trust, which has belonging, which has decency and dignity. So that's what I'm sort of striving for, to having those values at the center of everything, which will then create a society which is fulfilling for all of us, fulfilling and enriching for all of us.
Kia ora mātua. I'm going to turn that into a song, what you just said. No, that's fantastic. Look, I do want to say again, thank you so much for spending time to have this kōrero. I think it's a really important sort of kaupapa and message for all of us. I don't think that we spend enough time, considering and thinking the rights of all people and how we protect that from an equity perspective. I love what you've just said about values at the heart, values at the center. I'm going to continue to sort of perhaps revert back to the values that I was taught as a young man, and the values which were informed from a Māori perspective, from an Irish perspective, a Scottish, Welsh. I was taught about hospitality. I was taught about respect and key things that we've got to sort of make a very key part of our lives today. So, Mātua, I just wanted to say in the first place, thank you so much. We'll no doubt catch up soon for a little bit more than soup and bread, hopefully. And at the same time, just a big mihi to you. And I'll leave the last word with you, Mātua, and then we'll close it up.
Well, my last word is to thank you for the soup the other day. Thank you for sitting with me, you and Anjum sitting with me, and my colleague Philippa the other day. Thank you for the incredible work that you have done and continue to do with Anjum and with many others. And I just want to sort of reiterate that that non-Maori, if I could use that ugly term, but non-Maori have nothing to fear from Te Ao Māori and from Te Tiriti. On the contrary, they have everything to gain. So thank you so much, Gareth. I really appreciate it. Kia ora.
Kia ora mātua.